All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, our Lesson 4 exam review. My name is Dan and Zach, my colleague, is here to assist throughout the webinar. If you ever need to get in touch with us for any questions about your course, here's some contact information options: phone, email, text, appointment scheduling, etc. Please feel free to reach out to us at any point throughout your course with any help you might need. And just remember, you will get a recording of this webinar as well, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. If you'd like to, feel free. If you do have a question for Zach today, you can hit the questions button and send that through, and he'd be happy to help you with those questions you might have. So in today's webinar, we have a few objectives. Okay, we're going to talk about Lesson 4 and everything that you will be required to know for your test. We're going to explain the various verb tenses in Lesson 4, prepositions and their placement rules, and talk about some numbers as well. All right, so everything here is focused on both the lesson and then the exam that you will eventually take for Lesson 4. And just remember, Lesson 4 is the first written exam, so it's a little bit different. It's not a multiple choice exam. You will either have to create a file and submit that through the portal as a DOC or an RTF file, or you can handwrite them and mail those into us as well. So you have some options. Okay, so this exam is a 3-part assignment. As you can see on the slide, there is error detection. You'll have to make some corrections. There's math completion, some pretty straightforward multiplication problems, just looking for you to write out the Spanish answers in word form. And then there's a reading comprehension section as well. So we're going to try to talk about the key components of this lesson and this exam as we go through today's webinar. So the first grammatical component that we'll discuss today is the present indicative tense and its usage, and some key verb terms, not only for this tense, but for all tenses. And you can see those terms on the slide. We begin with what's known as an infinitive verb. All right, in Spanish, an infinitive will translate to English, starting with the word to. You can see an example. The verb escribir means to write. When it has the AR, the ER, or the IR attached to the verb, that is known as the infinitive. That's the way of identifying it as an infinitive. When you remove the infinitive, which is going to be part of our conjugation rules, right, you're left with the stem. So everything except for the AR, the ER, or the IR. And sometimes the stem is regular, other times it is irregular. It also could have a stem change, which we'll talk about. And then once you have taken an ending, which we're going to get into here soon, a new ending, and added it to the stem, you have what's known as a conjugation. When a subject and a verb are in agreement, that's the full verb form. That is a conjugation. So in English, something like I run, as opposed to she runs. Okay, run and runs would be conjugated forms in English, and we're going to talk to you all about how to do that in Spanish throughout this webinar. All right, some other important things about key verb terms are person and number. So the person, as you can see here, will tell you who is doing or performing the action of the verb. Just like in English, can be in first, second, or third person. And the number gives away how many subjects perform that action. So it can be a singular subject or a plural amount of subjects. Just some key terminology here for as we move forward throughout the rest of the present tense discussion. If you have any questions for Zach at this time, we'll take a quick pause. You can send those in. If not, we'll move forward here in a moment. All right, as we continue with our present tense discussion, we're going to discuss the usage of personal pronouns. Okay, and at the top of this slide, you'll see the English forms and how many of them correlate to the bottom chart, the Spanish forms. Okay, and there are a couple things just to keep in mind. For instance, a word like it, which we use in English third person singular, doesn't really carry over to Spanish. Okay, but words like usted and ustedes, as you can see in third person singular and plural in Spanish, they don't really apply to English because we don't use the word you as a third person option. And then as the bottom of the slide says, vosotros, you won't learn that, you won't have to use that, you won't be responsible for that in your program with us. It's primarily used in Spain, so it's not something that's often taught in the United States. And then you do notice that there are a few forms of you. And second person is always familiar, meaning somebody you know, a relative or a friend. And third person in Spanish would be formal or unfamiliar, sort of a stranger, or just somebody you're showing respect to, not necessarily a friend or a relative. So those Spanish terms at the bottom are very important to get used to. You're going to see them, you're going to have to use them, and just be able to match them up to their English counterparts. All right, so as we continue with the present tense, we'll now look at its translation. And it could translate two possible ways. The first way, quote unquote, as itself, or verb dependent. All right, so it depends on the verb, and you see some examples there. In English, I run, I eat, I sleep. From Spanish to English, it's going to sound different depending on which verb we're dealing with. There's not really one clear-cut translation. But another option would be progressively, meaning it must have that gerund, that ing verb, or it could have it at least. That's one option. So instead of I run, I am running. So present tense conjugations can translate these two ways. And then eventually at some point, in other lessons, you'll come across present progressive a little bit later. So just keep in mind that the present tense can translate two possible ways. If you see an English sentence that has a present conjugation, one of these two options could make sense. Sometimes they both make sense, so either one would be acceptable. As we move forward now, we're going to get into the conjugations that we talked about a few slides back. And we're going to start with what is known as a regular verb in the present tense. And in order to conjugate, in order to get to that subject-verb agreement, something like I run or she runs, but in Spanish, you have to follow two steps. And think back to those key verb terms we talked about earlier. The first step for any Spanish infinitive verb would be to remove that infinitive ending, the AR, the ER, or the IR. And then, as we mentioned earlier in our discussion on conjugations, you will add these new endings, these present tense endings that you see in the charts below, to the stem, creating a conjugation. So for now, you're just sort of looking at endings. An AR chart on the left, those are endings that apply to AR, regular verbs, and then an ER-IR chart on the right, which apply to regular ER-IR verbs. We're going to apply those and show you some examples throughout. Okay, so these are very important endings, not only to recognize from Spanish to English, but then to apply from English to Spanish. So, very important slide here. All right, so you will see a couple of conjugations on this slide, but we're going to talk about the placement of the subject and the verb in a Spanish sentence or statement versus a Spanish question. And the key difference is in a statement, a sentence, the verb appears after the subject. So the subject comes first. And you can see that in that first example in the middle of the slide. Yo is the subject, meaning I, and hablo is the first singular form of hablar, the verb to speak. So that sentence says, I am speaking to the two brothers or the two siblings. And notice the subject is first because it's a statement. It's not a question. However, in the question below, you should see that the verb comes first. It appears before the subject, and that's very important to keep in mind as you begin to write more Spanish. So habla is now the third person singular form of the infinitive hablar, and it agrees with usted. So if you were to go back to the previous couple of slides we had on personal pronouns and present tense regular endings, you would see that usted is in the same box as the letter A, the ending on habla. And you would also see that yo is in the same box as the letter O at the end of hablo. They match up. First singular with first singular for the sentence, and third singular with third singular for the question here. Okay, so again, as we said on the previous slide, you could have two possible translations to these sentences or questions. I speak to the siblings, or I am speaking to the siblings. They both make sense. Or are you, the question is asking, are you speaking to the two siblings, or do you speak to the two siblings or brothers, either one. So both possible translations make sense in this context. Okay, if you have any questions for Zach, I'll take a quick moment of pause before we transition to discuss some present progressive information, as I mentioned we would get to. Okay, so we're going to start talking about present progressive here, another component to both this lesson and the exam you will eventually take for this lesson. And it's a tense that describes actions in progress, something that's happening right now. To compare that and contrast that with the present tense deals with a more everyday basis. I live in this place. I speak these languages, as opposed to right now I am doing my homework. I am eating my dinner. Okay, present progressive is more in the moment, or at this very moment. And in order to conjugate present progressive, it's a little bit different than present tense. Present tense conjugations are made up of one word, as we saw, hablo and habla, so on and so forth. In this case, an easy way to remember that you need two words is that present progressive is two words. So you'll have to have a two-part conjugation for this tense. And the first being a conjugation of a star. If somebody is doing something right now, is and am and are, they all come from the infinitive to be in English, which in this case is a star in Spanish. So you're going to have to conjugate a star to agree with the subject, and then you're going to form what I mentioned earlier, the present participle or the gerund of the next verb, the thing that is happening, eating, doing homework, running, etc. So you must have two parts, all right? That's one major difference compared to present tense conjugations. So you have your helping verb to be, followed by the ing form, the present participle, also known as the gerund, and you see some English examples down below. That second step in English will always end in ing, and Spanish has very specific endings to represent that ing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So here we have just a layout of how to form present progressive conjugations. As step one said on the previous slide, you're going to take a present tense form of a star. As you see at the top of this slide, estoy, estás, está, estamos, and están being your present tense conjugations of a star. And you're going to follow that with the present participle of the next verb, the thing that is happening right now. So if we were taking a photograph, let's say, using the verb sacar, right, you would say something like estoy sacando. So notice the AR has been removed from sacar, and you've added ANDO. That is the equivalent to ing, or one of the equivalents to ing. The other is on the right side, IENDO. So if you're dealing with a verb like comer, to tell somebody that you're currently eating, estoy or estás, está, estamos, or están comiendo. And if you notice, the gerunds don't change. They only have one ending, either ANDO for AR verbs or IENDO for IR and ER verbs. but the conjugation of a star will change depending on the person, the subject or subjects. So 2 steps. Top part, start with a form of a star. Second part, in the middle and the bottom, form a gerund. Put them together, 2-part conjugation as opposed to what we had in the present tense. And we'll show you some more examples of that as we move forward here. After those examples, we'll take a quick pause as well if you have any questions. So here they are. First one dealing with the verb to write. As you can see, conjugation of a star, followed by the gerund. I am the subject, so estoy agrees with that. Escribiendo, we've dropped the IR from escribir, the infinitive, and added the IENDO to equate to ING. So I am writing a document today. Second one is an example I sort of mentioned earlier. We are doing the homework now. Since we are the subjects, now we're going to use estamos, both coming from the top right of our personal pronoun and conjugation charts. Hacer, H-A-C-E-R, is the verb to do. So we've dropped the ER and added IENDO again because ER and IR verbs, numbers 1 and 2, they share the same gerund ending. But hablar in the question in number 3 is an AR verb, so that's why it has a different ending, as you saw in the previous slide and charts. So are you speaking to them? Or are you talking to them? Hablar can either mean to speak or to talk, either way. And if you notice, just to review one thing we discussed earlier, since number 3 is a question, ustedes, the subjects, will follow. And that could be in between, it could be after hablando or should, or it could also be at the end of the question. But as long as ustedes is not before the verb in number 3, it will be okay. Okay, if you have any questions before we move on and transition to our next topic, please feel free to send those in to Zach right now. As we move forward, we're going to transition to another tense, the imperfect tense, which is a big part of lesson 4 and something you'll be tested on. And it's one of the forms of the past tense in Spanish. So now we're going to be transitioning from present to past. And it's different than the preterite tense, which is also another past tense, because imperfect deals with something that started in the past is still ongoing. Like I was reading when you called. You started reading a while back, it was ongoing when another action happened. Or something that's habitual or repeated. I read for a few hours every night, every week. Something that you're in a habit of doing, something you do quite often, something that you don't just do once and end. So imperfect will be our focus here for the next couple of slides. Past tense, past actions that are ongoing or habitual or repeated, not just happened once and done. That would be the preterite's usage. Okay, the way that the imperfect can translate from Spanish to English would be progressively, with a word like was or were involved. So I was reading when you called. Something like a repeated action. I used to read more than I read nowadays. Or you can just simply say something like, I read for 5 hours tonight. Something that happened for a relatively long amount of time, not just like a one moment or one instance thing. Imperfect would be the choice in that context. And see some examples down below just to compare to English. Okay, similar to the examples I stated. Okay, so that discusses the usage and the translation of the tense, and now we'll transition into how to conjugate a regular imperfect tense conjugation. So one thing to keep in mind, this is another simple tense. It's like the present tense, meaning it's made up of one word for each conjugation, not 2 words. Progressive tenses, like we talked about earlier, they're not simple tenses. Okay, so they do not need 2 parts. And to conjugate a regular imperfect tense verb, follow the 2-step process on the slide. Again, remove the infinitive ending, AR, ER, IR, and then add the endings you see in the charts below. Left side you have AR endings, and again, combined together, ER and IR endings on the right side. And some notes about the usage of accent marks below those charts. All right, here are some examples of regular imperfect verb conjugations, an AR, an ER, and an IR. If you notice, we've removed the AR from Hugar and added the endings we saw on the left side of the previous, slide. And then for layer and vestir, remove the ER and the IR respectively and add the endings we saw on the right side of the previous slide. And the accent rules apply. For AR, it's only on first plural, jugábamos, but for the other 2, it's on every person above the I. And to wrap up imperfect tense, here are a few practice sentences and questions. Just sentences. I apologize. Okay, so estudiar, the verb to study. I was studying for my exam. It's an AR verb. So much like dibujar, which is to draw, another AR verb. It's going to take those aba or aban endings. And then vivir, an IR verb, will take the ia ending. So all regular imperfect conjugations, right, shown on this slide, just based on what we talked about on the previous few slides. Okay, next we will talk about prepositions, moving away from the tenses for now. And, sort of the placement of where prepositions fall within a Spanish sentence or a question. So if a simple question includes a preposition, then that preposition must be placed at the beginning of the question. And you can see example 3 down below. All right, a preposition up top, appears within a phrase to describe relationships to another noun. So you see some examples in the chart there. But as far as the placement is concerned, if it is a question that includes a preposition, more often than not, that preposition should be at the beginning. Even though we don't really speak that way in English, we misspeak often with the use of prepositions. It is proper English and Spanish not to end a statement or a question with a preposition. So typically the preposition should be somewhere other than the end of the statement or the question. And if it's a question, specifically at the beginning, like you see in number 3. Okay, so one thing to make note of, which you will see not only in this lesson and on this exam, but throughout your Spanish program, the word a, the first one on the left side of that chart. Okay, in Spanish, it can also be used as what is known as the personal a, when a person or persons is or are the direct objects of the sentence. So to make a statement, something like, she knows Miguel. In Spanish, you're going to need the personal a to be present there. And it would just be that letter A before the direct object. So in this case, Miguel would be the object. So a sentence like, ella conoce a Miguel. We don't often think about it in English, because we don't use it. But in Spanish, it is vitally important. So keep an eye out for any context where a person or persons would be the subject of the sentence, and you're going to need a form of the personal a in between the verb and the direct object or objects, basically the person or persons in that sentence that are not the subjects. All right, as we continue, we will have a brief discussion on Spanish numbers. And one key thing to keep in mind, a little bit different than in English, is that the word E, that letter Y, which means and, is only used between numbers starting with 31 to 99. And that excludes the even group of tens, such as 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So no matter where you see numbers like the examples below, 31, 64, 79, whether it's 10,000, 31, whether it's 1,000,000, 64, the only time you would use E, the letter Y in Spanish, would be between that 10 and that 1 from the 30s to 90s. You don't put and, the letter Y, pronounced E, anywhere else when writing out or speaking about Spanish numbers. So a little bit different than in English because we often tend to use and quite a bit with English numbers. Okay, so something to keep in mind because again, you will be writing out numbers as part of this exam when you do some brief multiplication, simple multiplication examples. Okay, on this slide, just some important numbers to keep in mind. Some hundreds and thousands, and even a little bit larger with 1 million and 2 million. And on the left side, most of those hundreds are what we consider regular, where you take the 1, meaning 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8, and add it to the word cientos, the plural number of 100. So 200, simply 200. However, 5, 7, and 900 are irregular, and you can tell that in the spelling. So it's not cinco cientos, it's not siete cientos, it's not nueve cientos. Some slight spelling changes for those three. So those are three key ones to keep in mind as you go through your program. And then some larger numbers on the right. All right, you'll be exposed to a little bit of this, but not too much. So just a good chart to keep handy as you go through, and you can find a lot of this stuff in your course material as well. Okay, so that wraps up today's webinar. Okay, we do thank you for your time and attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to send them in now or follow up with us. We have included our contact information again here at any point. Whenever you're working, if you want to reach out to us during our Monday through Friday 9 through 6 Eastern business hours, feel free to give us a call and we'd be happy to help you. We do want to wish you buena suerte in your program, and we encourage you to reach out whenever you might have any questions. It's better to check first and make sure everything's good and then move forward with your program. So thanks again for your time and have a great day.